Hello there and welcome to the Star Wars Showcase YouTube channel. Today we are taking a look at how to make a couple of custom improvements to the pre-existing Black Series Jet Trooper from Battlefront 2. So let's get into it. So the Jet Trooper that has already been released through the Black Series Gaming Grade subline, as you'll notice here, has a couple of glaring omissions. The first of which is his namesake. He doesn't have a rocket that came with him, and all he had was that tiny holdout pistol. So the second thing we also need to add here is a little bit of weathering, a little bit of kind of that battle-worn effect that you'll get more and more of as you play as this class within Battlefront 2. Now in the past, the only way to go to rocket like this was through, a storefront that's selling 3D printed parts, but Hasbro recently released a rocket trooper from Jedi Fallen Order, and so if you happen to have one of those on hand, or if you want another trooper, all I'm doing here is yoinking that rocket from this guy and giving him to our Jet Trooper. So once we borrow that rocket and we pass it off to our Jet Trooper, it already looks 100 times better here. And to be honest, if you didn't want to do any additional work or any other paint, boom, you've got your brand new Jet Trooper right there. But for the remainder of the video, we're going to talk a couple of different strategies to kind of weather and dirty up this trooper so he fits in a little bit better with that rocket aesthetic. So to start things off, we're going to do a little bit of paint chipping. So I've got a white paint that I like to use here. And what we'll do here is pour a little bit of this onto either a wet or a dry palette that you're using and add just a tiny bit of water to things. That way the paint is nice and runny. We don't want it to go on too thick here. And basically all we're going to do is I'm taking an old makeup sponge. You can get these at any store. And you tear off a little bit of a piece. And in doing so, the sponge isn't going to tear off cleanly. So it's got kind of these rough, uneven edges, which is exactly what we want. And you're just going to dip that sponge with all of its, uneven sides into your wet paint. And very similar to how you would if you were dry brushing, you're then going to take that, the paint-filled sponge and dab it a couple of times on a napkin or a paper towel to get most of it off. With the little bit that's left on the sponge, we can just do a little bit of dabbing and touching onto the blue parts of this guy's armor. And what that does for us with those uneven surfaces is gives us kind of a nice random chipped effect for this guy. It doesn't look too uniform, too concentrated like we purposely went and did it. It really just looks like, some debris or shrapnel kind of sprayed in his direction and chipped the paint in a totally random way. From there, I usually grab a toothpick and do a little bit more chipping to the white that we've just added, just because when you're doing this kind of weathering, less is always going to be more. So we put on that very thin layer. It comes off very easily with the toothpick there, but still looks really nice when contrasted against the darker blue underneath it. And you'll just work to repeat these steps all over the trooper there. Just a little bit of white, add that with your sponge, and then chip away little by little at your toothpick just to get that nice, very subtle kind of white chipped effect. So there aren't really straight lines anymore, and it looks like this guy has kind of seen a couple of tours. Now it's going to feel pretty subtle, like we haven't done all that much after you've gone through the whole trooper, but when you compare things side by side to kind of the base unmodified Jet Trooper, we do see that nice difference that we've been able to add. And so we'll just need to work then to repeat that process on both the trooper's legs as well as his jetpack. And remember, if you add too much of that white paint, you're able to scrape it off with a toothpick. Or to be honest, because we thinned it out, you could even use, your thumb or the oil from one of your fingers, and it kind of scrubs off if you put a little bit of pressure down on things. Now, as one call out for the jetpack, I decided to keep going with the white that I was using, but because this is like metal equipment that's worn on your back, you might consider using like a gunmetal or any kind of metallic paint in place of the white here, doing a very similar effect, that watering down, the dabbing of the sponge, to kind of add a different kind of feel to that particular accessory. Once that's all done, we'll move on to the kind of wash coat layer. For those who are unfamiliar, a wash is really just a very thinned down version of a paint. And so in this case, I'm taking Nuln oil, which is basically just black paint that has been thinned out. So you'll put on, almost like you would, people call it a steak sauce layer. You'll really layer it all over the armor. And then like I'm doing on screen, after you wait, maybe 5-10 seconds, take a paper towel and just dab all of, the excess liquid that you've just put on the armor. And what will remain is kind of this darker, grimier layer on his armor that again just adds a lot more to that worn look that we're giving this guy. So as you're adding a wash layer, whether it's a Nuln oil or just one that you mix yourself with a couple of drops of water and some black paint, again, just remember that less is more philosophy here. It's very natural to want to say, let me just slather this guy up in the wash coat and then let it just kind of dry so it's really grungy. But I've always liked a little bit more of the subtlety for this, that as you dab away some of those layers, the wash really kind of sticks to the recesses of the figure. So it's not seeming like he's just jumped into some mud, but that, he's kind of been wearing this a while, that it's seen some grime, some dirt, some different explosions of that without being too kind of overt of an effect. So just like we did for kind of that white effect, we'll do the same thing on the white armor with our wash coat. So you slather some on, wait a couple of seconds, and then dab it off. And really up to your own, interest on this, you can repeat that step as much as you like. I do it just one layer all around, but you can repeat if you want more of that effect on there. You'll then do the same thing on the jetpack like we did with the white paint effects, just dabbing a little bit of the wash in there. And the jetpack has some nice kind of recesses and little gaps in there, so once that dries on there, it looks really nice, like the jetpack has kind of been through the ringer too. And it's up to your discretion at this point. If you want to take a little bit of black paint and a fine paintbrush, you can do a little bit more of that kind of black chipping effect on his armor. I chose not to do that for this particular one. Just wanted to showcase more of the wash as well as kind of that white stippling effect. But I do know a lot of customizers do that with both black and metallic paints, just doing very fine lines on there and then chipping away like we did with the toothpick to kind of add more of those kind of scoring or carbon marks on the armor. So with those steps completed, we now have an upgraded Jet Trooper here, who feels just a lot more true to the version that we saw in Battlefront 2. Adding just a little bit of a white paint effect as well as that wash coat, giving him that rocket. This guy definitely seemed like he's seen some combat and has spent, time rocket sniping across the map, which is what everyone did with the Jet Trooper. So let me know your thoughts on these improvements. If you have any other tips or tricks for, weathering or customizing Clone Trooper armor like this, would love to hear if there's other ideas, and would definitely love to apply some of those techniques to future videos as well. So let me know down in the comments below.